Monday, September 15th. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geeknights. Tonight, IPv6.
Let's do this.
I live. I'm back.
That's not good.
I'm no longer hacking up my lungs. I'm no longer sick. It's a good feeling.
You know, last week I was like really wanted to do episodes, and I still want to do episodes.
I did too. I mean,
but I don't want to do them as much as I wanted to do them last week. And it's all your fault.
Oh, so you don't want to do the show? We could just stop right now.
I do. I just don't want to do it as much as I wanted to do it before.
I think you just want to do things you can't do.
You people are getting a slightly lesser quality show because of Rim's non-immunity to illness. Meanwhile, I sat in a house full of sick people for a week and nothing happened to me.
All right.
Uh-huh.
Let's chalk that up to your sedentary lifestyle.
Wait. Shouldn't be. So you're saying the sedentary lifestyle is superior?
No, it's more that I guess I get out, I'm exposed to more things, I put myself at more risk for greater reward.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's definitely the cause.
No, I think, how could I be at more risk than in a house with the sick people?
You pretty much avoided us, and we avoided you, though.
It's not, it's the same house, it's all good.
Anyway, we're back, and to make up for the fact that the only show we did last week was a somewhat abbreviated Friday Night Party line where I basically sat there quiet or slowly went off on rambling tangents because I was sick and tired. But we're going to do 3 shows this week. So I guess the way I would put it is it's a Monday, Wednesday week, and we're going to do a Tuesday to be nice.
Yeah, we've got too much packs that we still have not emptied out.
Oh my God. I think all told, we're going to be able to say that there were at least 7 episodes directly caused by going to PAX.
Yeah, pretty much.
Luckily, only 2, maybe 3 of I think 3.5 of them are going to be about PAX, and the rest are just tertiary.
Yeah. So we're going to do some tech news, right? But we've got how many weeks worth of tech news we haven't talked about?
And the worst thing is I have this list of 9 articles I really wanted to talk about. I mean, last Monday I had a ton of news I wanted to talk about if I hadn't been sick. But Scott has some news that kind of is just breaking that really made us kind of have to forget about all that other BS.
Yeah, it's like I got all these newses. No, I got to do one that I just saw just now, a second before we started doing the show. And worse than that, right? It's like Apple put out their new Nano and whatnot, right? Well, we got 2 Apple newses, but they're not related in any way to the announcements they just made, which were pretty
I know. I mean, pretty much, though. I mean, the feeling I had is man, I totally got to talk about all this awesome news. And then someone walks into the room and they're like, oh, hey, Microsoft went open source. Yeah, 100%. And Bill Gates...
DMCA was repealed.
Yep, Bill Gates just wrote you personally a check for $1 million because he felt like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I feel like right now. Of course... It's not the good news. It's actually the bad news. It's more like Microsoft sued Linus Torvalds and then shot him.
Yep.
Oh, well. So I'll talk about this first because once we get on to Scott's news, there's really no turning back. So Apple, in their infinite wisdom, has decided that this scourge has got to end. They're done with this bullshit, and they're going to file a patent to make sure that people don't pull this crap off anymore. No more shenanigans. You see... Apparently, no, you know what? I'll quote from the patent application. Quote Apple, some people have taken it upon themselves to remove the sensor from the special pocket of the iPod-linked Nike Plus shoe and place it in inappropriate locations like the shoelaces or place it on non-Nike Plus shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Apple is filing a patent for clothing DRM in order to try to make it illegal and or impossible for you to take this little cheap sensor from this Nike shoe that's special and branded for Apple and put it on anything else or muss with it or move it to the shoelaces.
Well, because think about this, right? I mean, shoes look different and some shoes feel different and fit people's feet differently. And some shoes are better for one thing or better for another thing. It makes a difference, right? I mean, no shoe is going to let you jump as high as Michael Jordan.
But at the same
you could
time,
do that in a Chuck Taylor or in, Air Jordans.
There's a difference between cross trainers and running shoes.
Right.
If you're running, don't wear cross trainers.
Apple made this deal with Nike for this Nike Plus thing. And basically what they did is all right, we'll put this technology in the iPhone that links it with your Nike shoes so you can track, your running or whatever. And, people are having a lot of fun these days, having pedometers and all sorts of things like that, and heart monitors to track their physical fitness stuff, combining the workout with the technology. So the deal with Apple and Nike, the whole point of it was Nike's like, hey, if we're the only people who are allowed to put this technology in our clothing, we'll sell a bunch of Nike shit. And then people will see Nike logos all over the place.
But the patent is not for, someone else making a similar device. The patent is to prevent you from taking the device that's in the Nike and putting it in another shoe.
Because think about Nike, right? If you were let's say you're just trying to sell shoes, well, wouldn't you just make the best shoe and then people would buy it? But they slap Nike logos on everything, and the reason is because a lot of what clothing is you have your brand on the clothing so people see it, and if people don't see it, then it sort of defeats the purpose. And Nike made this deal with Apple. They're paying money to make sure that those things are only in Nike shoes and people see Nike logos.
But here's
on the street.
Amazing thing: it's not like you can pirate that sensor. Anyone who has that sensor, someone along the chain bought for money a Nike shoe that had it.
Right, but if Nike is going to sell you a shoe and then somehow you were going to be able to wear that shoe but no one sees the Nike logos and you're basically denying them. It's like the shoe comes with advertising. It's like you're taking the ads out. If you were going to take the ads out, they would have charged you more.
What I like is that you basically pay for the privilege of the advertising.
I know, right? So it's like they're selling you a shoe that is subsidized by the advertising on the shoe.
It's kind of like the high school fashion. I mean, kids wear, I guess, the Abercrombie or whatever. And
Abercrumble?
Yeah. Granted, I'll admit, most of my clothing was from Abercrombie when I was a kid.
I just had clothing that was just colors.
Part of that's just because I really only went shopping in the mall. But anyway, it's like most of their clothing is basically just a normal t-shirt that says their brand on the front of it.
Yeah.
But I think Nike's worry too is that once the Nike shoe wears out, no one's going to buy, well, geeks at least aren't going to buy another Nike shoe to get another sensor. They're just going to keep taking the sensor and putting it on their New Balances.
Yeah, because if you're stuck with the shoe wears out, but a technology like that doesn't.
Yeah, because the thing is, I mean, most people, if you're not active, I mean, shoes last a long time. But if you're a runner, you'll go through like 2 pairs of shoes a season.
Well, depending on what shoe you get.
Well, if you're actually a runner,
and where you run.
Even
if you run in
tracks.
like a gym and like with a shiny floor.
No, if you're a runner and you run every day, even on a shiny floor gym with the best running shoes in the world, those things are gonna wear the fuck out. But anyway, this patent, like, it bothers me. And the thing is, the Apple fanboys came out of the woodwork and they basically said, no. Apple's not being evil. Nike is forcing them to do this because if they don't, then Nike will get mad and they'll take their business elsewhere. Or Nike's forcing them to do it because of the licensing deal and they have to do good faith and blah, 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 blah. And more, I feel like I have to call shenanigans on that. I don't feel like Apple can use everyone else in the world.
Apple makes the technology here. They hold all the cards. Nike is probably paying them for the exclusivity, not
But yet every
vice
time
versa.
Apple has anyone gets mad about Apple DRM, that people always seem to say, no, they're forcing Apple to do it. They're forcing Apple to do it.
Apple is the DRM king.
Yeah.
This is the company that doesn't want you to put their OS on another piece of hardware. It's the company that has DRM in their iTunes store. It's the company. All right, Apple is DRM everything. This is not Nike's idea.
All right, so speaking of DRM, because I just had to talk about this, but Scott, let it rip.
So the one thing we've always said, right, is that we need a portable device. That there's no technological reason that this should not exist and could have existed 3 years ago, right?
I mean, the PSP basically does it.
Yeah. A piece of portable technology with Wi-Fi and or cell phone in it, right? That can get wireless data, that can subscribe to, download, and play podcasts on its own without any other device helping it. There is no technological reason this couldn't happen, right? All you need is pretty much a headphone hole, a processor, some flash memory, and a Wi-Fi card, and a CPU. I said processor. That's all you need. You connect those 4 things, you're done. That's the whole technology right there. I guess you need a screen and a user interface.
I want to preface this whole discussion by pointing out that it is my belief, and the belief of a lot of people, that podcasting and kind of independent non-radio audio in general
And video, too.
Yeah, but I think audio is the thing that could benefit the most.
Yep.
Is basically floundering, and the reason it is that people want to just listen to the radio without any effort. And when they're in their car, the place where most people listen to audio nowadays, outside of, cities where people do it in commutes, they just turn on the radio and they just listen to it. They don't have to synchronize anything, prepare anything, hit the button, it's there, they listen to something. They want to listen to something. But most people hate the radio. People complain about it all the time.
There's ads and shit, and
if they could just listen
get bad reception
to their internet radio or their internet audio.
Well, this is why satellite radio exists, right? Satellite radio doesn't have a lot of the bad reception problems that FM AM has, right? And it has 1 billion stations, so you can just pay, and there's relatively a lot less commercials. You have to pay a fee for it, but, you basically have a satellite radio. You say, I want to listen to blues music. There's 3 blues stations. You pick one. Blues music just starts coming in.
But at the same time, it's still not enough for the geeks because it's not balkanized enough. I can't listen to the obscure, weird music I like because it's not there. Right. And still, none of the podcasts, none of the time-shifted, independent, cool stuff, no pseudopods or anything.
So look at this. Podcasting, right? As podcasting is right now, you're obviously all listening to a podcast. It's fickle and difficult for normal people, right? They have to go to a website. They have to figure out RSS and subscribing. They have to figure out syncing. They have to manage the downloading and the deleting and the downloading again and the whole it's a thing to manage. It's a lot more work. You can't just go bam, right? Imagine if, for example, you had a satellite radio, right? But instead of all the different numbered channels, it was just there was a Geeknights channel, and you went in the Geeknights channel, and then there was a list of every Geeknights episode, and you picked one, and you push play, and it just played, right? That could be. There's no reason that technology doesn't exist today other than no company has bothered to make it.
And even without the cell phone and without the direct on-demand, why do I need to tether my stupid iPhone, which has multiple ways of getting data, even if it's not just, I'm out there and I listen to things streaming real time? Why do I need to go to my computer to sync? Why can't I just subscribe on the iPhone? It has iTunes. It's right there.
There's no reason that any device with Wi-Fi or even Bluetooth, right? Even if it has Bluetooth, I should be able to connect to my computer with Bluetooth to sync. Why do I have to plug the device into the computer, right? The Zune has to plug into the computer. Everything has to plug into the computer. There's no reason for that. If I was a company that made, MP3 players or, digital, portable multimedia devices, there would be no cable. There would be a charging cable. That would be it. The cable would only charge and everything would be over the air on its own. Now, think about what this does for a second. This technology that we're talking about here isn't just a convenient thing for podcast listeners, right? To be able to get a podcast, say, if they haven't been home in a few days, or, they can get a new episode if suddenly the episode shows up while they're outside and they don't have a computer handy, but they have their iPod ready. It is that. But what it really is, what this technology really is no matter where you are, you have on-demand radio. On-demand radio. Oh, my God. I mean, that's even better than satellite radio. Satellite radio, you have 100-something stations, but you got to listen to what the station's playing right now. On-demand radio is listen to anything you want, whenever you want, at any time, in any place. And something that can subscribe and download and stream podcasts with Wi-Fi or cell phone is that.
Now,
it's completely revolutionary. It's amazing. It would change the way people listen to everything, and podcasts would suddenly explode all over the place if someone made it.
Before we go into the news, the other point that I need to make, just in case you're not 100% aware of this, iTunes can do it. And Apple, very pointedly, very on purpose, disabled over-the-wireless podcast anything.
Well, they didn't disable it. They just... the iPhone has all the hardware necessary to do this in it. It has Wi-Fi. It has cell phone. It can play MP3s, right? People have made RSS readers for it. It can do it. There's hardware. If the iPhone had no software and it was just a piece of hardware and you wrote all the software for it, you can make it do that trivially.
Yep, and also software. It runs iTunes.
It does.
It runs iTunes. iTunes does podcasting.
It can download music from the iTunes Music Store, right, over the air, but it can't download a podcast episode over the air.
No.
Right?
Why?
This is the thing that Apple does all the time, right? Is that See, this is why, open source people are so crazy. If I have a piece of hardware, right? Let's say I have a fork, right? I go to the store and I buy a fork. Well, I can eat spaghetti with the fork, right? I can eat bread with the fork, I guess, right? I can do all sorts of things with the fork.
You can pry a nail out of the wall if you really want to.
I know, a fork can do so many different things, right? Anything that you can think of to do with a fork, if you bought that fork, you can do it with that fork if you can think to do it, right?
But Apple likes to attach a device and they say you can use this fork for anything you want except spaghetti. Fuck spaghetti.
Well, no, it's actually worse than that. What it is here, you have bought the fork. Here is the fork. The fork can do nothing. And here is software. This software allows this fork to do things 1, 2, and 3. The fork cannot do anything else except for 1, 2, and 3 because that is the only software we have made. We have not programmed the fork to do anything else except for these few specific things.
I put that fork into some unapproved spaghetti and the prongs just fall right off and my warranty's
No, it just doesn't even go. You try to put it in and it doesn't. It's impossible.
Prongs fall off, warranty void,
the fork just flies back into the kitchen and goes in the drawer.
Stabs your mom along the way.
Yeah. Right? This is why people are so crazy with Linux, right? Linux might be a little difficult for normal people or whatever. I'm not getting into that right now. The point is you have Linux on a piece of hardware. It's open source. If there is something that the hardware can do, you can do it. Because the software lets you do it no matter what.
To summarize, now this is before we even get into the news yet, the iPhone...
And this is true not just with the iPod and the iPhone, but all Apple products. OS X does not let you do everything that the computer hardware it is running on is capable of.
But in sum, for this specific news, Apple pointedly does not allow you to do this one thing that a lot of people would really like to do that really couldn't hurt Apple in any way.
Well, it's not that they don't allow you to do it. It's that they have not enabled you to do it.
Yes,
there's a big difference there.
But the thing is, basically you can't do it. And so what, could someone else let you do it? Could you write something else to do it?
Right. So of course the App Store comes out, right? And it's not just us that have seen this obvious gaping hole. Everyone in the freaking podcasting universe has seen this gaping hole.
This was like the first thing when Kotaku was like, "Oh my god, iPhone." They were like, "Can't do podcast, WTF, mate."
Well, Engadget, not Kotaku. Kotaku doesn't care. Right? But pretty much everyone wants this. So of course the App Store, it was only a matter of time before someone did it. So someone did it. And they submitted it to the App Store pretty much right away. And it was rejected from the App Store on the grounds, right? And here's where we start getting in trouble. They made this app that basically does exactly what we said. You can just subscribe to podcasts, download them, or stream them, audio or video, over the Wi-Fi and over the cell phone network. Just, wherever you have a connection. To the iPhone, it's all good. All right. The only problem with it is because, the way the apps on the iPhone work, it doesn't integrate with the iPod software on the iPhone. So it's not like you can add the podcast to the iPod section. You can only play them, from within the app itself, which is a little bit annoying, but it doesn't matter because it's still great, even, for getting that small problem, right?
Now I'm gonna play the naive, optimistic person. So here's my little role play. Golly gee, now I can listen to podcasts on my iPhone without having to synchronize it to my iTunes. Hot damn.
Yeah, well, they rejected it from the App Store. And the reason they said they rejected it from the App Store was because it duplicates the functionality of iTunes.
Now. So Apple won't let me synchronize podcasts over the air with their software. And if someone writes software that does just that one thing, they say it competes with their own software that doesn't do that?
Now, here's the thing, though, right? This is where it gets kind of crazy. First of all, it doesn't compete with their software because it doesn't duplicate anything. It adds functionality that iTunes doesn't and the iPhone don't have. Secondly, there are people out there making apps for the iPhone, such as weather apps and calculator apps and all sorts of other apps that do just duplicate existing functionality of the iPhone and iTunes and don't do anything else. So those apps are allowed in, yet this one isn't. And the only thing that's puzzling is why don't they want this technology?
Now this tells
They're not
us
competing. They're not friends with the satellite radio. What do they give a shit about them?
No, that's why this is such an important and interesting news, because this tells us something. this tells us that there's something we don't know. There's some specific reason Apple does not want us to have this functionality. Because, they could have had a bunch of internal reasons. You know how dev teams are. They might say, well, this feature, blah, 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 let's just not bother with it. They could have a bunch of semi-BS, but good enough reasons. Who cares? It's a company. They do whatever they want. But the fact that they didn't include it, and then they very specifically disallow this, means that there's some specific direct reason why Apple, as a policy reason, does not want us to get podcast over the air.
And this is something that people want. Millions of people want this, and people who don't even know they want it want it.
So
it just doesn't exist.
That's the question. What is it? What is the reason? Why does Apple not want us to have
Not just Apple.
this?
Why has no company just jumped on this?
The PSP.
The PSP is too big.
I know, but it's the
If the Zune did this, everyone would have Zunes. What the fuck is Microsoft smoking?
But I'm really curious
If any
now.
creative makes 1 million MB SanDisk, there's so many Samsung. Someone do it. Good, and this is why, right? This is what open source is all about. If the hardware is the only thing that actually requires a big company and money and all this, such. With open source, if it can be done and people want it to get done, it gets done. No, if somehow, right, instead of having like portable devices that were controlled by companies, portable devices were like PCs where you just could put whatever operating system on there you wanted, all of them would do this. Every single one of them. It would be,
But still, I want to know. I'm curious what you guys out there think. Like, why? What is it? Do they think it'll compete with them selling stuff in the iTunes store?
If podcasts, if they were worried about podcasts actually like succeeding and somehow nobody pays for any music or listens to any streaming radio or anything anymore ever, it kills satellite FM and the iTunes store and everything, and suddenly podcasts are the only thing left. If they're worried about that, why do they even have podcasts in iTunes in the first place?
Maybe because they added it and then, to get iTunes out there, and then they kind of don't want it to get any further, and they're just hoping it'll die quietly.
Yeah, because, if iTunes didn't have podcasts in it at all, I wouldn't use an iPod, that's for sure.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't either. I basically only use my iPod because it does podcasting better than anything else in the world.
And that's another thing, right? Even if no one else is going to go for the wireless podcast, go for the big score, why don't you at least just do podcasts as well as iTunes does it? Everyone else is podcasting. They do it like poop. It's like completely useless even.
Part of that, I think, is just it's a catch-22.
Even desktop applications like Amarok and such don't do podcasting on their own.
But that's really
as good
simple.
as iTunes does
It's really obvious why that. It's a catch-22. Not enough people listen to podcasts for anyone to care about doing that. Because not enough people listen to podcasts, there's no benefit to be had. But there's a difference between Apple saying it's not worth our effort to support this in any way, and Apple saying we are going to pointedly prevent you from doing this, even when someone else did all the work for us.
Yep.
So the story doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't. So
this is why we're talking about this. Everyone get ready to raise a big finger in the sky.
All right, so normally, right, the only way to get software onto your iPhone is to either get it from the App Store or jailbreak, right? Well, the people who made this podcasting software that was rejected from iTunes have come up with something better. Right, basically what they've done is, first of all, you can go to their website and watch a video of the software to be suitably impressed. They're not Geeknights listeners, but, they listen to, all the podcasts, the tech ones like the Twits and the Buzz Out Louds and all those things, right? Anyway, they have made their software available to people who have not jailbroken their iPhones, but not through the App Store. The way they've set it up, as far as I can tell, right, is you go to their website, you give them your email address, then you give them the UDID, which is basically the unique identifying number from your iPhone, and they have instructions to tell you how to, give them the number. You give them the number. What it appears to me is they're taking this number, putting it in their, iPhone dev kit or, iPod Touch dev kit or whatever. I think it has to be iPhone. I'm not sure. And then they are using that to deliver the software to you via their dev kit, it seems. So they're basically circumventing the App Store to get this app out there because they care about it that much.
Okay, so one, what this means is that Apple is going to sue the fuck out of them. So
We're going to see what happens here,
So
but I'm going for it all out.
everyone out there, jump on this now. The more of us have it, the more damage we can do.
Yeah, of course, people are speculating about, Apple being able to remotely delete things and such and such and such. But I hope there's some sort of court action where we bring to light some sort of industry conspiracy or, collusion to prevent a particular technology from coming into existence that would be
'Cause
obviously beneficial or something like that.
It might be far-fetched to say that, the technology industry at large has some sort of consortium or conspiracy.
Yeah, it is a little crazy.
But it is not at all crazy to say that Apple, very specifically, is trying to keep this under wraps.
And why? I don't understand why they don't want to do it. If Steve Jobs said, all right, think about this. Steve Jobs just did his little announcement. He's like, new nanos, yada, 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 right? Imagine if his announcement instead was, new nanos. By the way, the nanos have Wi-Fi. And by the way, over-the-air podcast. People would be going, woo! Instead, people are going, boring. You got nothing good. We didn't even get new MacBooks. Fuck you, Steve. Come back next time. Right? It's so easy. It's like a pile of gold is sitting there and no one's picking it up, but we can't pick it up because we don't make hardware. If I somehow got money from any investor at all, I would just do this immediately and I'd be immediately rich. It's a guaranteed hit. I don't even care if no one has me do it. Someone else do it. Good God.
Things of the day. So, actually, this is one of my favorite movies, even though it's a terrible movie from almost any perspective. It's full of one-liners, bad special effects. The plot is hilarious, and the thing is, it's hilarious partly because it takes itself completely seriously almost the whole way through. This movie is The Running Man.
What? The Running Man's not terrible? What's wrong with it? The Running Man is awesome.
That movie is terrible and awesome.
No, it's just awesome in a non-ironic fashion.
Wait. Now, terrible, Scott. You realize that the word terrible and the word awesome, depending on what definition you use and what connotations you bring along, have very similar meanings. Ivan the Terrible, the awesome and powerful.
Right, well,
it is
I will
awesome
say
and
The
terrible.
Running Man is a fine piece of cinema among the
big money, big prizes.
I'd have to actually make a list. It might make my top 100, but maybe 200, but it's way up there. And, because there's just so many movies. There's,
part of that's
hundreds
because
of good ones, but
he says, I'll be back, and he's totally back, but not for a half hour.
Right. Anyway, I love The Running Man. It's great.
It is a great movie. It is great, awesome, and terrible.
It's fantastic and not terrible.
It is very much terrible
It
and
is
awesome.
good.
Lee, awesome and terrible.
Good,
Lee.
just period.
It is goodly.
No.
Anyway, what I have for you is the original theatrical
Excellent.
trailer to The Running Man. And let me tell you, in the era before Thunderthroat, movie trailers really, really sucked.
Does that mean they're going to suck again?
I don't know, because I don't know. I haven't seen any movie trailers in a while. I haven't gone to a theater.
Yeah, me either.
The thing is, I see a lot of independent film movie trailers, but they're never like normal movie
Well,
trailers.
they don't hire Thunderthroat. Well, no one's hiring him now.
Someday we're going to have the capability to just recreate his voice perfectly.
Well, just start smoking now and you'll get there.
No, I'll probably just sound like this in about 5 minutes.
No, that's what you're going to sound like when you're 80. When the mid-range and you're 50, you'll sound great.
Yeah? But anyway, because that's not enough of a thing of the day, the bonus pack, because they both have the same word in the title, at least the same root word, I have the 3-minute-long theatrical trailer to Logan's Run. Now, if you think that movie trailers from the Running Man era are bad, feast your eyes and ears upon the terribly good trailer to The Running Man, which is also a fantastically, awesomely terrible movie.
I could go on a slight tangent about comics for a minute if you want.
That's fine.
Okay, so check this out, right?
I'm checking.
At PAX, Ken Levine, who was giving the keynote,
yeah.
he talked about how he was buying the Logan's Run comic when he was a kid, right?
And how it disappeared.
And
because there was no internet, he had no way to know what happened to it.
Right, and of course it was canceled because no one was buying it. Well, I'm a fan, I'm not big on the superheroes, obviously, if you haven't listened to a Wednesday episode, but in Marvel Comics, there's the Cosmics, which are basically, it's all the comics about what happens in space. You know, it's not about Iron Man and Captain America. It's about the Silver Surfer and Galactus. And
Thanatos.
Right, exactly. Oh, Thanos.
Whatever.
Right.
I don't read any of that underwear pervert crap.
Right, so there's a dude, Adam Warlock, in space, and he's pretty fucking awesome. He's my man, right? And the thing is, I've never read, like, the old Adam Warlock comics. And recently, Marvel came out with this hardcover that's like Annihilation Classic. It's basically, they took a bunch of classic space comics, put them in a book, and they sort of labeled them with the same label that's on the new space comics, and it's sort of like, hey, read this to get some background information on the new space comics, right? And there's an Adam Warlock comic in there that I kind of want to read, and there's some Rocket Raccoon and whatever. But Logan's Run #6 is in there.
6?
Yeah.
You made it that far.
I think there must be something in Logan's Run #6 that ties it into the Marvel something or other.
There can't be.
There must be.
What?
I don't know.
What could,
but I'm not going to buy the book to find out because it's hardcover only. But if it's ever softcover, I'm going to buy it and find what the
there's
deal
an
is.
easier way. On a Wednesday, just ask people to tell you what the link is. Someone out there is going to own that thing.
Maybe. Anyway, so checked out this news. Thing of the day, not news. I did my news. So it's, the U.S. military has good and bad parts of it, but the best part of it, according to Scott,
good parts made the internet, bad parts killing people.
Exactly. Is that the good parts are that we give it so much money that in order to spend, because in the way government works is you get money from the government. And that if you're a government department or agency, and if you don't spend all the money, let's say I own a government lab, and they give me $1 million 1 year for my budget, and I spend $800,000, they'll say, "Oh, I guess you didn't need $1 million. Here's only $800,000 next year," and you go, "Fuck," right? And then if you try to do something more, well, now you're SOL. So the military gets lots and lots of money, and since a lot of that money goes to defense contractors, those defense contractors say, hey, if we want to make more money, the only way for us to make more money, because they don't have any customers but the government, right, is to tell the government to increase the military budget. And it goes in a cycle, basically, of the military spends all its money on research and making shit. Then the government, has to increase that budget because the contractors make them and because they're the ones who get the money in the end, and so on and so forth. And the result of this, despite it being sort of bad in many ways, with the military-industrial complex, is that many, many awesome technologies are developed, and many of those, besides, the ones that are pretty much only military use, like space death lasers, are used for, civilian things later on. Like the internet, which is meant for one thing, but is now meant for me talking to you right now. So one thing the military has developed, right, is basically little, unmanned, like flying little airplane guys, right? So
that was some eloquence right there.
That was. I mean,
drones, spy drones,
basically like a robot spy plane, but not like a big spy plane, like a little one that you could hold. But it's
hence, I would use the word drone.
Yeah, it's not as small as like a paper airplane. It's like about a meter wide or so, maybe like that. It's hard to tell. It's pretty big. You pick it up and you can throw it, right? But it's big. It's like as wide as a person, or wider than a person, right? And you throw it, and then it flies to its pre-programmed destination. It's got like a GPS. It's got little motors to control the rudders and such. It's got a motor to keep it going. A little propeller or whatever it is in the back. And you could put like a camera on one of these, throw it, program it to fly over the enemy base, take a bunch of pictures. It comes back with the pictures or transmits the pictures to you over the air or something like that, right? It's a military technology. And, we try to think of what use could this technology have for the civilians. And you think, well, I guess, you could use it for fun, right? Like you use an RC helicopter for fun, right? But what, or you could use it for sort of mundane things like spy on your neighbor or follow your kids around if you remote control it or something like that, right? But they have found perhaps the best use of this technology for civilian purposes.
What, Scott, could it be?
Do you know what it is?
No.
Oh. So basically what they did is they slapped 2 red crosses on the bottom of it, right? And in Africa, what they do with these now, or at least what some people are doing with these, is they go out and they get some blood samples, and then they throw it, and then it goes to the lab.
Brilliant.
Right? It does more than that, right? Oh no, I'm in the jungle, and I got bit by the poison spider. I make a phone call, they attach the antidote to the plane, and they throw it, and it comes to me with the antidotes.
How does it know where you are?
Basically they know where you are because you have a GPS. They program the GPS coordinates.
Oh, okay, so I have a GPS.
It flies itself. Like, you tell it where to go, you throw it, and it gets there the vast majority of the time. It can go against winds that are like 40 kilometers an hour and get there.
I can think of another thing to use this for.
Right.
Totally awesome note passing.
Well, yeah, but you could basically. I think they said it can carry 500 grams or something like that. So it can carry a lot of shit. This thing. Without...
I can think of another use for it suddenly.
What?
Awesome drug dealing.
Yeah, I'm gonna paint mine black. Throw it at night.
I realize that's gonna be that's not that far from the future.
No,
that's not that far from the future at all.
No, it's not.
That's like the best way to deal drugs and not get caught. Oh my gosh.
Right, you can just throw these, right? You get Western Union's fucked because all the people, if they want to send their money back to Mexico, will just throw it right over the fence.
There's already a big problem where people are smuggling cell phones and drugs and things into prisons.
Dude, you could have this thing like
by shooting model rockets over the walls, which is trivial to do. I could shoot a model rocket into the downstate correctional facility from my window if I wanted to. It's right there.
Yep. So yeah, these they're getting pretty good with these things, and I'd like to have one. That'd be pretty cool, I think.
How much are they?
I don't know.
Can I just buy it on Amazon?
I don't think it's a thing for sale. This is like a military technology here. You're not gonna have a hard time getting one.
Someday I'll get one.
Someday. But right now, it's just cool. And there's a video, and there's an article on New Scientist. That's it.
So I realized we've never really talked about this.
I was the one who realized it.
Well, we realized we've never really talked about this, and it came up in a somewhat unrelated conversation.
Well, I was thought up an idea, and simultaneous to thinking up the idea, realized we hadn't talked about what the topic of today.
Yeah, because Scott was like, what if we did this? And I was like, IPv6 already does that.
Well, no, I was saying, what if we did this with IPv6? Will it work? That's what I said.
Yeah, the thing is, the idea. We're not going to get into the idea, but basically, we haven't talked about IPv6.
No, we haven't.
Of course, it's kind of moot because IPv6 is not moving quickly, at least as far as any of you would ever be concerned.
No. Basically, people who don't realize this, right? Right now, people talk about IP addresses and such. The internet and all your home networks, pretty much, unless, and everything you know about the internet is IPv4. Right? Everything is IPv4. I bet you didn't even know there was a 1, 2, and 3.
127.0.0.1 IP addresses. IP version 4. That's what that is.
It's the 4th version of the IP Internet Protocol.
Now, before anyone says, so what's IPv5? It's something unrelated involving streaming. It's the same reason why all the 802.11 somethings are completely different things. There's no rhyme or reason.
Yeah, it's like, why was there A, B, G? What happened to C, D, E, and F?
They're all there. You can look up the list. You don't care about what any of them are, believe me.
Yeah, the only ones that are important to you are the ones that you see letters for. H, I, J, K, L, M are not important to you. N is.
A wasn't too important.
Well, it's a little more important than any of those other letters besides B, G, and N.
Yeah, but 802.11, not 802.11, God, IPv5, basically pretend it doesn't exist. IPv6. Now, the deal is pretty simple. IPv4 and what we use as IP addresses was conceived and put together a long time ago when the world was very different. And
when the government still owned the internet.
And things were broken up into classes and routing was pretty simple. And there are a lot more devices than anyone ever expected or intended on the internet. And the only reason we're still able to use IPv4 is by continually hacking it together and making little changes and natting and cider and
basically IPv4 on its own is not capable of handling the internet as it is today. In order to make the internet work, we have somehow miraculously, I don't know how it happened, and I'm amazed that it works every day, built all these other technologies on top of IPv4 to make it work. We've made crazy routers, unbelievably crazy routers that shouldn't have to be made, but they were made, and now we need them. We've made NAT, which is something we never would have needed.
Well, NAT and PAT actually
NAT has some uses other than that, but really, we wouldn't need NAT if IPv4 wasn't poop.
However, the thing is, a lot of interesting things have come out of this. Like, for example, because everyone is using, well, technically, someone says they have a NAT router. No, you have a PAT router because it's port address translation, but I digress. like the proliferation of that sort of network design for consumers has actually gone a long way to protecting you from the terrible secret of space, aka the real internet.
Yeah. And IPv4, the biggest problem with it, long run problem, is that even with NAT, right, you will run out of addresses eventually. I mean, the biggest address you can have is 255, 255, 255, 255, and that's not a lot of the addresses you can't even use because they don't, they're not real addresses. They're special for some reason.
Well, here's the thing. Any sort of hierarchical system like that, kind of like phone numbers when they were originally conceived and area codes, they were used in an era. I mean, there were no cell phones. There was no phone number portability. Phone numbers, to a large degree, area codes and all those different like parts of a phone number denoted geographical areas for purposes of routing phone calls. And that became increasingly useless with things like cell phones, and routing got really complicated. And actually, one of the biggest failings of IPv4 is that routing became incredibly complex because we wanted to split up the way networks were originally designated, and the hierarchy went all to shit. And
yeah, they used to attach, right, the numbers to the physical world. So they would say, oh, your number is, this. Well, that means it's in New York somewhere. So now we know to route it over this cable. And it was basically by having that tie-in between the structure of the numbers and the structure of the real world, setting up routing was really easy and simple. It was just sort of like, oh, this goes that way, this goes that way. You didn't need anything complex.
See, you could simplify routes. Like, you knew all the 129 dot anythings are going to be in that direction from all these different locations. You didn't even care what's actually over there or where specifically it is. You just know that way, that way.
So if you had like 3 different, network connections coming out of your router, right, going to, one goes west, one goes east, one goes north, you pretty much say this third of the IP addresses go left, this third go right, this third go north, all done, right? Easy as pie.
Now, of course, we're grossly oversimplifying, but
of course,
like one example of how we've really hacked this together is it wasn't that long ago that CIDR, classless interdomain routing, was introduced. And this was basically to break up the very rigid structure of IP addresses in order to allow us to take advantage of addresses that existed that, due to the structure of the way we used IP addresses, couldn't actually be used. It's kind of like if you built a house, but in order to support the house, you had to build this big column in the middle of the house. And inside of that column, which was a big square, was void space that could not be it was in no way accessible to people just because of the way you built the house. It was used for pipes and stuff. But now you really need that extra space. So you tore down all those walls and basically rebuilt the inside of the house with this very complex and incredibly difficult to understand system, just to use that extra space that was there anyway, but inaccessible. But as a result, you lost a lot of the advantages of the original structural design. And I'm not going to explain how CIDR works, but for anyone who has a little, just enough knowledge to be dangerous, here's the simplest way I can explain it, and I hope you can figure out the rest. A Class C address is the old way of talking about something. A subnet mask, 255.255.255.0. Nowadays, that's a /24. I hope you can figure out the rest from there.
Yeah. Anyway, so we had this crazy system that's way old and antiquated, but somehow we have put things on top of it and modified it and come up with different things to make it still work for our modern purposes. But
it's also partly due to the unintended, part of the reason we thought we'd run out of addresses is that as more and more people got devices that were capable of going online, every cell phone, every computer, every chair, every refrigerator gets online, you suddenly run out of public IP addresses. But it's turned out that future never really came to be, and all the devices that are becoming online are largely passive or hidden, or they're not really content publishers to the world. They're content publishers to local subnets, or they're content receivers. I mean, no one's hosting a web page on their cell phone.
Right. So we've been able to use NAT/PAT to avoid that problem pretty much, almost completely. But one day, that problem will happen, and we will run out of IP addresses. It's going to be really slow, a lot slower than we thought it was going to be years ago. Years ago, we were like, oh, shit, we're going to run out.
I mean, dude, in high school, I remember saying, oh, man, we need IPv6. We're fucked.
Right. And then, NAT sort of saved the day. And people realized, oh, we're not going to run out. But we are going to run out in a while.
Nat
Maybe
saved the
5,
day, but
10, 15 years.
Really, it's cider that saved the day. But anyway.
That too. Those two things combined have saved the day. Regardless, IPv6 is the long-term solution, and it has many other advantages, and the only disadvantage of IPv6 is that everyone has to switch, and it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, but at the same time, there are a lot of ways to make that transition, and there is actually a lot of infrastructure that none of you can see that is IPv6 compatible. IPv6 works. There are ways to tunnel IPv4 and IPv6 through each other and all sorts of...
IPv6, the first thing you'll notice about IPv6, right, is that the IP addresses aren't easy to remember. Which,
in a way, is good because IP addresses are really this kind of back end that you shouldn't need to know anymore. It's a bad analogy, but in the old days, I knew someone's phone number, and if I didn't, I looked it up. Nowadays, I kind of cache my knowledge of the phone number in my cell phone. I don't know a single human being's phone number in the world now, except my own. And my cell phone
I have a hard time remembering my
me.
own.
Well, I know my own because I memorized it a long time ago.
I'm still memorizing mine. Anyway, so IPv4 addresses, you've seen IP addresses like 192.something.something.something, right? IPv6, here's an example IPv6 address.
Look, it is 8 groups of 4-digit hexadecimal numbers.
Right, so it's 32 symbols, and the symbols could be anything between 0 and F. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F.
It's hexadecimal, so I could have FF1A, B74A, 1111, 1411,
It could be 32 Fs, and there's a colon in between every set of 4 Fs. So 4 Fs, colon, 4 Fs, colon, 4 Fs, colon, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more sets of 4 Fs.
Granted, that's the colons and things are just to make it easier to remember and write. Kind of like the dots in IPv4.
Exactly. So if you think about that, right, if we used every IPv4 address in the world, how many addresses would that be?
Far fewer than you think, because most of them are useless.
Right. Well, even if all of them were useful, right, that's 255 times 255 times 255 times 255, right? That's, let's see,
I'm surprised you didn't do this calculation ahead of time and or have it memorized.
I think it's like 4.2 billion addresses, maybe?
There's a much simpler way to put it. IPv4 is 32-bit.
Yeah,
it's 32 bits. IPv6 is 128 bits. That is more IP addresses than like the entire current population of the world per square meter of surface area of the world with plenty to spare.
Exactly. You could, if we used IPv6, that means you could have, right?
Billions of IP addresses for you.
Billions of IP addresses
and billions
in 1 square inch of the surface of the Earth. In other words, if one day we want to have like nanobots and we want every single nanobot to have its own IP address, IPv6 can do that with no problem. It's like, yeah, whatever. We got IP address to spare. Go nuts. We're good.
Now, it's actually like the ramifications of such a large address space go far beyond OMG will never run out of IP addresses. And I kind of want to spend a little bit of time just talking about, this is kind of the primer to think about what you can do when given more resources than you need. Because usually as computer scientists or IT people, we're always in the situation of do as much as you can with as little as possible. Here's 4K of RAM, write that program. Here's $5, make that network. IPv6 is the equivalent of, here's $1 billion, connect those two computers together.
Yeah.
And now think about this. Currently, I have a computer, and I don't want to, program the IP address every time I use it. We use something called DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. It basically is the thing where I turn on my computer, it gets an IP address from another source, from my Linksys router.
Right. When you have a computer with IPv4, there's two things you can do. You can either type into that computer with your hands, this is your IP address, computer, or you can have a server on the network. And when the computer turns on, it'll talk to that server on the network and say, hey, server on the network, what's my IP address? And the server will tell it, or it'll say, no, fuck you, you're not getting one, right? But you have to set up this server. You have to actually someone somewhere, your network administrator, had set up the server with their own hands.
Or if you have a Linksys router, just does it, and people.
Well,
don't know.
your Linksys router does it on its own,
Yeah.
but it's serving. Somebody with their hands had to make the IP addresses happen.
Now, the thing is, or you can just do it all yourself, but there is a third way, and this has been done in IPv4, and I'm not going to talk about all the different ways to do it, but Microsoft actually did it better than most people. You ever heard of the
Not
auto?
perfectly, but
no, it works
better,
really well though.
Better than most.
The auto configuration. Have you ever noticed how if you don't get an address and you have a Microsoft Windows PC, sometimes you'll get like an address that's all weird. It's like 60 something dot something, and basically what it does, and I'm simplifying obviously, but Windows computers, if they're set up this way, if they can't get an IP address and they don't have one configured, will pick in a certain range that Microsoft happens to own a random IP address, ping the local network to see if anyone has that address, and if no one does, they'll take it for themselves. And a bunch of Windows computers can kind of make their own ad hoc network on their own with very little, if any, interaction.
I mean, it's rarely useful, but on occasions, if you just take a bunch of Windows PCs and plug them all into a switch, right? They can sort of start networking, and it is like a Windows for Workgroups, sort of fallback kind of thing. They can start connecting to each other. They'll sort of come up with addresses on their own, and some things will work that you can talk to each other.
Now, before we talk about what you can do with IPv6 that's cool with this, I want to talk about the fact that because there are so many IP addresses, there was a lot of really interesting structure built into IPv4. I mean, there's the whole multicast group, there's the experimental group, there's like the broadcast and all these kind of different things and hierarchies and kind of built-in structure that is inherent in the design. But when you've got so much extra space with IPv6, you have a lot more room to work. So as a result, you could theoretically think of this. What if you set aside in any given network 1 billion IP addresses, just random ones, and any computer in that network can use some sort of semi-random seeding mechanism to pick an address in that scope if it doesn't have another way to get one. Odds are it will be a unique address, and basically you can have DHCP without a DHCP server, and there's so much leeway that it'll just work. And you define, ways to automatically find routers and automatically say, hey, I'm a new computer, are there any routers? And routers in your local network can say, hey, I'm a router, now I know you exist, let's play.
In other words, because there's so many IP addresses and the odds of anyone picking the same one as someone else are effectively zero because there's just so many, you can just sort of have networks that configure themselves well. Really, without doing anything. You just plug computers in, boom, they're working, they're networked, it's all good, internet, go. You don't have to fiddle with your network settings. No one has to set up the router. Someone has to set the router, but they don't have to set it up as much as they would in IPv4. There's a lot less tinkering, and you're going to have a lot less problems where, my, networking is not working now. Pretty much going to be, are you plugged in? Is your computer broken? If those things are yes, no, your computer is plugged in and it's not broken, it's probably going to just work with IPv6.
But I mean, the really interesting thing is that this idea, like the root idea here, is the future. This is the future of everything. Right here, right now, if you don't realize it, this kind of non-deterministic, ad hoc self-configuration of multiple nodes is the future of all computing. This is the future of CPUs. This is the future of networks. This is the future of software.
Yeah, we're talking about things like right now, right? Let's say me and Rim have cell phones and we're sitting in public space, right? We want our cell phones to talk to each other. Well, let's pretend that these are awesome open source cell phones with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and everything, and the software is Linux, okay? What do we have to do? Well, you can do an infrared link, or one person has to say host and the other person has to say connect, and we have to aim them at each other. Or, someone has to say, I'm making a Wi-Fi network, and the other person says, I'm joining your Wi-Fi network, and the other, or you could, and then the guy who's hosting the Wi-Fi network has to run like a DHCP server and tell the other guy an IP address and a whole thing. Or if you're doing Bluetooth, one guy has to be like Bluetooth discovery mode, and the other guy, right? With IPv6, if you pretty much just like, hey, what's up? Click.
IPv6 is not the thing that's going to cause that. I'm talking more about the root concept, because IPv6 still has a lot of limitations. And
there's limitations that pretty much every layer under
what I'm
and
saying
above
is that IPv6 is not going to make any of these things happen. IPv6 is just a very rudimentary, very kind of initial and very explorative exploratory exploration of these sorts of concepts. But the future, on a core, to not talk about the technological underlying layer, non-deterministic ad hoc networking and communication is the future. And this non-deterministic is, with this big space, IPv6 allows a very rudimentary form of this to happen. I mean, another example of this, I mean, this is not a new idea. Token Ring was deterministic. You could calculate bandwidth perfectly. Everything was controlled. Every network device was intelligent. Every piece along the way was controlled, deterministic. You knew exactly what was happening. Ethernet basically just shot its crap all out all over the internet and all just kind of worked out. If things ran into each other, everyone just said, whoa, backs off. They wait a random amount of time before trying again, and everything's kind of random and fuzzy and non-deterministic. But as speeds got better and as, technology got better, these non-deterministic means always win out over the deterministic means of communication in the end. And we're going to see a lot of cool things in these fronts in the future. IPv6 is one tiny example of this.
Yeah. Here's another cool feature of IPv6, right, is the multicast, anycast, whatever, right?
Yes, there is multicast in IPv4,
right.
but
let me explain to you what this means, all right? IPv4 does have multicast, but it doesn't really work super as you would want it to.
Well, it's partly experimental, and you can we use it for a lot of things at our job, and IBM we used it, and Cisco uses it a lot, but there are a lot of problems with IPv6 and with multicast and IPv4.
Yeah.
What IPv6 has done, because in IPv4 there was, broadcast, unicast, multicast. There is no such thing as broadcast in IPv6 because the idea of broadcast and broadcast domains and collision domains are basically archaic nomenclatures that in modern networking don't make sense. So as a result, they got rid of that. There is just multicast. Multicast is defined. Multicast is universal. Multicast is broken up into, to not use all the jargon, multicast to my local network. Multicast to all the routers on my network. Multicast to my broad segment. Multicast to my geographical area. All these kinds of defined multicast addresses or multicast networks that allow for really, really interesting things. Maybe not so much for you personally yet, but for large networks, for configuration, for organizations, for backbones. This is a killer app.
Yeah, I mean, think about it right now. You have a computer. I want to send a video to RIM. So I open up a connection directly to RIM, even though it's packetized. It's not like a telephone network where it's a solid connection, but I'm connected to RIM and I send him stuff, to him only. I want to send the video to someone else at the same time. Well, now I have to use twice as much bandwidth. I'm sending the same video 2 times over the same wire to 2 different people. If 20 people want the video, I'm sending the same video 20 times over 1 wire. And this is why sites go down, because a million people come and say, gimme, 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 and then their bandwidth fills up and the pipe that connects to their one computer, and then they're done. If we actually had multicast with IPv6, which is a lot more useful than the IPv4 one, in that you could actually do other things with it besides, network management, and it could actually be relied upon to do what you want it to do, I could send out the video just once over my wire, and then it would go to the next router and the next router, and it would only split up when there was actually people to split it up amongst. It would go to one router and say, all right, everyone this is going to is still in that direction, okay? And it only takes up 1 space worth of itself until it gets somewhere. Okay, some people who want to watch this video are to the left and some people who want to watch it are to the right. So now we'll split it up, but now it's only taking up 2. Yet at the farthest end of the network, there could be 100 people who want to watch that video, but we're only sending 1 copy of it over the network because it's a broadcast.
Now,
and
granted,
it's going to make it there.
It's not really going to work like that in the real world. I mean, basically, it is primarily going to be used within individual networks as opposed to on the global network. I mean, it's more for the uses people out there you will have, is that if it's more understood, more well implemented, and just works better, and there's more space to use it, there'll be a lot of software, say you want to watch a movie on your, you want to stream your anime fan sub or whatever in your local dorm room or your house. It'll automatically stream with this to all the devices that want to see it on your local network without going on all the links that don't need it and all sorts of fun stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, think about it for right now, right? Let's say Rim wants to watch a video that's on my computer, right? And then I want to watch the same video downstairs. So now my computer has to read this video and send it to 2 different computers, and our network bandwidth in the house starts filling up real quick, and it gets slow and blah. If we had IPv6 and we had it set up properly with the new technologies, it would be all good, and it would just send the video to both places, but only send it once.
Of course, only with specialized software, and only if we're both watching it at the same time, or we have some sort of very complex caching mechanism. But I digress. I mean, we're not getting into the specifics. But
here's a really good example of how it'll make everything awesome. Let's say you want to play a game at a LAN party, right? Instead of having the game server, right, send the game state updates to having to manage sending the state updates to each individual player, it'll just broadcast the game state on the local network.
The thing is, you realize that most LAN, like if you pick LAN instead of something else, it does that anyway.
Really? I've never seen it do that. Unless you do the IPX BS.
Well, like Steam and a lot of things do that. I mean, if you just play like most games and you just pick LAN, it'll broadcast a whole bunch of information around. Every game does it differently. And the other caveat here is that most game publishers probably won't care because most people play online, but you can do interesting stuff with this. The real interesting thing about IPv6, the real interesting thing along these lines is something called Anycast. Now, the idea here is that you have an IP address or whatever, a destination that exists wholly and completely in multiple places. And routers basically use the routing protocol updates they get from their neighbors to route your requests and its responses from the nearest node to you. So say I am Valve and I have Steam and I want to have you download software from me. I have multiple Steam distribution servers in multiple geographical locations. And if you connect to a Steam server, you connect to an Anycast address that is just basically the Steam download server. Routers take your request to the nearest, and nearest is a logical thing, not a physical thing, server, and you just get the updates from there. But it's all seamless to you. Right. You don't need to know or care. In fact, there is theoretically no way for the end user to know that an address is an Anycast address as opposed to a unicast address.
Right. Isn't it right? Right now, things like this are actually happening, but they're doing it a very hackneyed way. For example, look at Google, right? Try to ping google.com. It's going to show up as an IP address. Right? Maybe if you ping Google from somewhere else, you'll actually see it's a different IP address. What's happening there is Google uses Akamai, and I could talk about Akamai as a company that basically does this thing. And the way it works is you ask the DNS server, hey, what IP address is google.com? And depending on many factors, it'll tell you a different IP address to match up the name. With IPv6, the difference is instead of asking for google.com and getting a different answer all the time, you ask for google.com. If it's IPv6, you're always going to get the same answer. And that number will be the same for everyone. But that number is actually just sort of a nickname or alias for a bunch of other numbers that are where the servers really are. And it decides on the routing layer, a lower layer, it does this on its own. Basically, the Akamai company will go out of business if IPv6 comes into play.
No, they won't, because...
You don't think so?
Well, the thing is that the whole reason this is secure is the same reason the internet kind of works, is that large networks and like the higher tier providers pair with each other. They trust each other. And this happens at a low-level protocol layer, too, where you trust the routes you get, the route updates. Routes are the things that tell packets where to go, basically. And, you need to get your routing information from your neighbors and from other people out on the world. And they get their routing information from other people. And you have to choose who to trust and who not to trust. So for Anycast to work, the big name players and the people who really matter on the internet have to trust the routes that are being propagated. And Anycast will probably for a long time only really be available to very big players.
No.
Which is for the best, because otherwise it is the biggest freaking security hole in the world.
Yeah, but I mean, if we've solved all these problems on top of IPv4...
No, we haven't. We've only solved them because these people trust each other that way.
If we've solved other problems on top of IPv4, I'm sure we could solve, the problems in IPv6 just as easily.
Oh, yeah, but what I'm saying is that things like Anycast, a lot of this cool functionality works because of the same reason the internet works now. Very, very large networks trust each other on a very specific technological level. And you do not have access to that trust, and no one is going to trust you.
No one's trusting you at all.
Trust on the internet is pretty much the most important commodity at a network level.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things you think you can do that are all cool, you cannot do because no one will trust you except your friends. That's the simplest way I can
You can do
explain
them
it.
with your friends.
Oh, yes, most definitely. But
in fact, you can do it with your friends right now. IPv6 is just, your computer probably has everything it needs. You just need to set it up. You can set up a little LAN with IPv6 real easily.
Yes, but getting your IPv6 onto the real IPv6, I'm not going to get into that.
It's much more difficult.
Just Google for IPv6. You'll find how-tos. I mean, I actually used to have a whole ton of addresses on the 6-bone back in the day because, we went to RIT where we had access to internet too and all those sorts of fun things. So I requested a ton of IPv6 addresses and my own IPv6 network on the 6-bone because I was in a class where I had to do a big thesis on IPv6 and interoperability. I dropped out of that class right away, but I didn't give up my space, and I played with it for a long time. That space is now gone, but that's the end of that story.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything cool with it. I basically just played around and failed.
But basically, I mean, as for using IPv6 now and moving the internet over to it, right? It's basically a huge pain. Right now, some things you can do are you can, connect to other IPv6 enabled things out there across IPv6 networks, but they're not easy to find. You sort of have to know. It's
more that you probably have IPv4 connectivity, and IPv6 might be tunneled. A lot of ISPs are not going to have direct IPv6. It really depends on who you are, where you are, what you're connected to.
Yep.
It's far out of the scope of this episode to talk about that. Suffice to say, if you are at all interested in networking and IP and IT and all these things, if you try to learn how IPv6 works on a fundamental level, and if you want to try to learn how to connect to it, in the process of learning that, you are going to learn a lot about networking, and you're going to become very competent on a theoretical level very quickly. So look at IPv6 not as practical knowledge, but as a kind of far out goal that if you seek that goal, you will learn a ton on the way, kind of like installing Gentoo.
Yeah. I mean, they're doing all sorts of weird things these days. Like they're putting IPv4 addresses inside of IPv6 addresses, and they're tunneling IPv6 over IPv4. So it's like, well, I have an IPv6 network and you have an IPv6 network, but there's only an IPv4 network between us. But we can make this little tunnel, and now we sort of have an IPv6 network between us. And
because I mean, for most consumers, IPv6 is not going to actually matter to you for a long time, and even then, it's going to be completely transparent to you. You'll never really be affected by it.
Yeah, the reason it's taken so long is basically everyone has to switch all their stuff, and no one's in a rush to do that because they don't need to right now. There's no benefit that you will notice right away. You basically, if I had two networks set up with the same computers and one was 6 and one was 4, you couldn't tell a difference. The difference is all where you can't see it. It's completely invisible to you as a user.
But much like Zombocom, the possibilities are endless.
Endless possibilities. Oh, billions and billions of possibilities per square inch.
This has been Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music.
Be sure to visit our website at www.frontrowcrew.com, where you'll find show notes, links, our awesome forum, a link to our Frapper map, and links to all the RSS feeds.
We say feeds plural because Geeknights airs 4 nights a week, covering 4 different brands of geekery. Mondays are science and technology. Tuesdays, we have video games, board games, and RPGs. Wednesdays are anime, manga, comic nights. And Thursdays are the catch-alls for various rants and tomfoolery.
You can send us feedback by email to geeknights@frontrowcrew.com. Or you can send audio feedback via Odeo. Just click the link that says Send Me an Audio on the right side of our website.
If you like what you hear, you can catch the last 100 episodes in iTunes or in your favorite podcatcher. For the complete archives, visit the website, which has everything.
Geeknights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 2.5 license. This means you can do whatever you want with it as long as you give us credit, don't make money, and share it in kind. Geeknights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.